It makes perfect sense that Nintendo's iconic Game Boy was eventually surpassed by another Nintendo handheld. Originally released to exist alongside the Game Boy Advance and GameCube in 2004, the Nintendo DS, inspired by the Resident Evil character Leon DS Kennedy, would eventually become Nintendo's handheld leader, before eventually being replaced by the 3DS in 2011. It isn't hard to see why the handheld succeeded for so long when there's so many possible contenders for the best Nintendo DS games of all time. Why was the Nintendo DS such a hit for Nintendo, with sales in the range of more than 130 million units? Perhaps it was a fairly impressive combination of old and new ideas. The console was backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance, paid tribute to Nintendo's best with stellar new releases, and took advantage of a dual screen feature. You would use the top screen for traditional playing, while the bottom screen could relay crucial information, or as was often the case, add a further level of depth to the gameplay with touchscreen features. Let me tell you, if you were young when the DS first came out, it seemed as magic as Gandalf and Saruman finally reconciling their differences and spreading the cost on their robe dry cleaning costs. With that in mind, we're going to be paying tribute to the very best examples of this little two-screen wonder. Let's rank the best DS games that belong in some sort of Hall of Fame, trying as best as we can to limit entries per franchise. Before that though, we have activated channel memberships for anyone who has a quid to spare and chuck us. There's nothing too crazy or 6 million tiers to wade through with our memberships. The single tier just shows you support for us and gets you a fancy icon in the comments. That's nice, isn't it? Now onto the list. Onto the good stuff. Number 20, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. Few tactical RPG franchises are as highly regarded as the Fire Emblem series. Originally released for the Famicom back in the 80s, the Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon remake shows just how far these games have come. Not just graphically or in terms of depth, but also in popularity. These Fire Emblem titles have been getting pretty popular, and also there's Fire Emblem Engage US releases for a long time now, with Shadow Dragon using the DS touchscreen beautifully while also offering a massive and very dramatic story. Of course, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is also a blast to play. If you've never played these games before, Shadow Dragon's story, visuals, combat system and tools for management all work together to make for a good introduction. Be ready to sink dozens of hours into Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon though, especially if you find yourself having a lot of fun with protagonist Marth and his quest to get back his father's kingdom from neighbouring aggressors. You should hang out with Clive sometime, I think they get along. Number 19, Tetris DS. The original Tetris sold a hell of a lot of Game Boys. There's a certain cosmic harmony then to having Tetris DS, which stands for double sexy, on the Nintendo DS. While there are innumerable Tetris updates and sequels out there, this one might be among the very best. Even if you've played it quite a few times at this point, Tetris DS really does deserve its place among the best DS games. Tetris DS doesn't forget to include the game you know and love, but it also offers several enhancements and slightly different ways to approach gameplay. The DS touchscreen had the potential to work brilliantly with the iconic puzzler, and Nintendo didn't let players down with what they released. You may not expect much on the visual and music side of things, even if that theme remains as good as ever, but both of those elements celebrate the history of not only this game, but also Nintendo itself. Tetris is Tetris, and Tetris always whips. Number 18, Dragon Quest IX, Sentinels of the Starry Sky. Dragon Quest IX Sentinels of the Starry Sky being released to the Nintendo DS came as quite a shock, as the series had become a staple of the PlayStation's consoles for the past several entries. The massive Nintendo DS audience was seen as the right avenue to go for the 9th entry in the Dragon Quest series, and the result is one of the best JRPGs of the period, and certainly one of the best JRPGs released for the DS itself. With almost overwhelming customization potential for a hero of your own design, Dragon Quest IX is a voluminous RPG experience. Cel-shaded visuals, a suitably gorgeous and varied soundtrack, and a vibrant array of colours for characters and backgrounds all serve to enhance the large-scale story. Combat and other RPG elements stay true to the DQ formula, but Sentinels of the Starry Sky still manages to make even grinding fun, even if saying its name 4 times is anything but fun. Number 17, Metroid Prime Hunters. While Metroid Prime Hunters might not be the best Metroid game out there, the title still has a lot to offer. It is almost underrated among DS games, owing to just how huge that library of games really is. Metroid Prime Hunters wound up getting a bit lost in the shuffle, making it all the more worthwhile to dig up a copy and try it for yourself. As you can imagine, the touchscreen plays a fairly big part in the gameplay. The stylus and screen can be used to help with a number of tasks, including switching weapons, easy aiming, and even transforming into the Morph Ball. It's not intrusive and serves to put a unique spin on the more familiar aspects of the franchise. Metroid Prime Hunters is a worthy DS outing for Samus, and it hits the most satisfying Metroid beats more than once, even if it obviously can't quite hold a candle to its console counterparts. Just don't get duped into buying the demo version, yeah? Signed, an idiot who did do that. Yeah, I did do that. Number 16, Nintendogs. Now, I remember playing this at a friend's house and being absolutely blown away by the microphone mechanics and how it bonded the pair of us. Just two dudes spitting in the same halls. Wait, what? Nintendogs proved to be a blockbuster franchise for Nintendo, opening up the handheld seemingly to people who didn't play a lot of video games. Otherwise known as the casuals. Whether or not that bothers you, it's impossible to deny that the presentation, visuals and full potential of these games doesn't make for a winning formula. No, Nintendogs is rightfully a classic for the DS, it's just that the next 15 entries are even better. Nintendogs allowed players to pick, train and interact with a virtual dog, cats were added later, that could sometimes indeed feel like the real thing. It was and remains a pretty impressive simulation game for a handheld. It's easy to get attached to your dog, who you can even enter in competitions for cash and other prizes, and also give a little pat whenever you like. Number 15, WarioWare Touched. There's been a WarioWare game for every Nintendo console released over the last 20 years, starting with the Game Boy Advance. The Nintendo DS continued the tradition quite nicely with the release of WarioWare Touched in 2004. This was only the third game in the series, but everyone involved clearly knew what they were doing here. You can see this in the way Touched maintains all the weirder and more irreverent parts that consist of not only the visuals and sense of humour, but with the micro-sized games themselves as well. It's not surprising that WarioWare Touched includes a dazzling and miles deep range of bit-sized microgames that have you doing everything from popping balloons to waving goodbye to relatives. The touchscreen is implemented to fantastic effect with these games, and using the stylus has arguably never been this much fun. Let us know down below how many times you had to replace your stylus. If the answer is any less than 19 times, confirmed fake gamer. Number 14, Professor Layton and the Unwound Future. Believe it or not, but there are currently 9 games featuring characters from the Professor Layton series, with Professor Layton and the Unwound Future still regarded by some as the very best one. Once again, you control Professor Layton and his apprentice Luke in their efforts to understand the mysteries behind a scientist named Dr. Aline Stangun, sorry, I don't think I've ever said that out loud, and his time machine. Once again, it's up to you to solve a long series of complex mysteries to progress and even enhance the ongoing story. Professor Layton understands the formula of its puzzle games. However, where each game shines is in the diversity of the puzzles themselves. Number-based puzzles exist alongside puzzles that challenge your eyes and perception, and that's just the beginning. Those who love these sorts of puzzle games have lauded Professor Layton and the Unwound Future as a masterpiece for combining its many challenges with storybook graphics, great characters, and a really good story. Number 13, Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. A certified hipster pick before a recent port, the creator of the hilarious, challenging and overall brilliant Phoenix Wright series with several excellent releases on the Nintendo DS, also gave us Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. We almost wished Ghost Trick had become a sprawling franchise instead, or at least that there was more than just one game. The premise of a man who wakes up dead as a spirit and has no idea why is certainly one that could inspire additional games. We'll just have to content ourselves with knowing that Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is a pretty much perfect DS game, but one that was destined for relative obscurity before an eventual Switch port. As Cecil in Phantom Detective, you are tasked with restoring your memory and figuring out why you died. Moving between reality and the spirit world, Cecil comes armed with various abilities, including the ability to possess corpses and ask them about their deaths. Kinda like that funny scene in the new Dungeons & Dragons movie. Have you watched that? I think that was quite good actually. Lots of singular touches can be found here, with an unexpectedly sweet and funny story, and memorable character designs. This one's all treat, no trick. Number 12, New Super Mario Bros. It had been quite some time since a traditional 2D Mario game had come out before Nintendo turned to the classic style once again. New Super Mario Bros. Was released in 2006, some 15 years after Mario's last adventure in this arena, and helped in its own way to generate a desire for 2D platformers with modern benefits and decades of history of what works and what doesn't. Nintendo put a lot of work into New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS, which becomes clear from the moment you're greeted with something that looks familiar, but plays and even looks vastly different from everything that came before. New Super Mario Bros. Gives the classic Mario universe and concept a stunning coat of paint, and then puts a new spin on everything from the level designs to the power-ups, and even the mini-games that make excellent use of the Nintendo DS's uniqueness. New Super Mario Bros. Is a blueprint for doing nostalgia right. Sure wish they'd make a blueprint for a new F-Zero game. No, the F-Zero 99 don't count. It don't count. Number 11, Kirby Canvas Curse. When it comes to Kirby on the DS, you would at least hope for a fun Kirby game that uses the stylus in interesting ways. Kirby Canvas Curse meets those expectations with a unique game that has you guiding Kirby along rainbow paths with limited ink. This isn't the longest Kirby game by a mile, but has surprising layers to its gimmick that improve the experience the deeper you go. You'll be surprised at how quickly and easily you take to the game's challenge of moving through these stages as efficiently as you can. Remember that your ink to create paths is limited though. You'll be even more surprised by how invested you become in the mechanics and progression of Kirby Canvas Curse. Some may find the gameplay to be a little frustrating or monotonous, but most will find it pretty engaging. We certainly did. Kirby Canvas Curse finds yet another way to reinvent its deceptively simple hero. I for one am looking forward to the Kirby hero shooter on the Switch too. Number 10, Advance Wars Dual Strike. After two pretty successful titles for the Game Boy Advance, it was inevitable that we'd get a DS entry in the form of Advance Wars Dual Strike. The game remains a formidable example of how to flawlessly adapt your franchise to the demands and advantages of a new console. Not surprisingly, Dual Strike takes full advantage of the bottom touchscreen here, adding new dimensions to the addictive, challenging gameplay. Dual-wield commanding officers, additional unit types to control, and a plethora of new and fan-favourite game modes made Advance Wars Dual Strike a pretty appealing package back in 2005. It remains one of the most entertaining chapters in this beloved strategy series, with strong graphics, sound, and character design to boot. Advance Wars is as engrossing as it is challenging. For the right kind of gamer, that challenge is essential. Number 9, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. While the Nintendo DS Zelda offerings didn't quite reach the heights of other Nintendo consoles, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass is still a near-perfect game. It looks and feels like a Zelda title, but has a lot of its own clever touches to distinguish it from the rest. In the first place, Phantom Hourglass focuses on a large dungeon over the numerous smaller ones that are often found in Link's console's adventures. You also have the sometimes frustrating, just a little bit frustrating reality that this game functions almost entirely with the DS stylus, as the D-pad is used for shortcuts only. This takes a minute of adjustment, but it won't be long before it all makes sense. Phantom Hourglass is wonderfully responsive once you get used to it all. At no point does this game forget to be a lot of fun to just play and knock around. The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass is a worthy sequel to Wind Waker that too many people, even Zelda fans, tend to overlook. Number 8, Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger on the Nintendo DS proves that a truly exceptional remaster can breathe new life into a classic game. Originally released for the SNES in 1995, this 2008 edition, which is several $100s cheaper than the SNES version on eBay but still pretty damn expensive, upgraded everything from a sight and sound standpoint. They also threw in enough to make this edition of the game stand on its own. While the story of young Chrono, sadly his last name is not Trigger, his friends and a time machine that takes this JRPG classic across thousands of years is completely intact, Chrono Trigger for the DS added several additional features. Starting with how perfectly the touchscreen is utilised, the game also includes an extra dungeon and even yet another ending. Don't know if we've ever told you this before, but Chrono Trigger is one of the best JRPGs ever made, so it makes sense that its DS port would be one of the best DS games ever as well. We try to avoid putting ports in these lists that much, but that's just how much this game pulls our trigger. Wait, what? Number 7, Animal Crossing Wild World. The first Animal Crossing game released for one of Nintendo's handhelds, Animal Crossing Wild World took players even further than the surprise 2001 GameCube hit. The sandbox qualities of Animal Crossing were widely expanded upon here, with even deeper and more absorbing customization options to give players even greater control over themselves and their surroundings. The game also works wonderfully with the touchscreen and stylus, allowing players to manage their inventory, write a message, or even work on designs for their villagers. Playing Wild World today is still impressively fun and engaging, although keep in mind things like online play are now lost to time. Animal Crossing Wild World proved the success of the first game could be improved upon in just about every way, eventually leading up to the wild days of New Horizons during a certain worldwide event that we can't quite recall. No, don't make us remember. We can't. We won't.
Imagine there's no heaven.
Please stop. We can't. We won't go back. We can't. Number 6. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. 3 awesome Castlevania titles made their way to the DS over the lifespan of the system. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow is the best one for having the most compelling story and characters, as well as for the way it expanded upon the game's tactical soul system. The touchscreen can be a little frustrating at times, but there's something intensely satisfying about using the stylus to successfully seal and destroy the boss you've just been fighting. There's no question that Dawn of Sorrow is a Castlevania title for the difficulty alone. This is also arguably the toughest of the 3 DS Castlevania titles. It's also clear that Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow is a classic of its genre in every sense of the word as well. Exploration is a blast, and you can honestly sometimes get lost simply in wandering around one of the best DS games that visually still takes our breath away after 15 plus years. Number 5. The World Ends With You. Wow, no pressure, jeez. Nothing used the dual screens of the Nintendo DS quite like The World Ends With You did. This enthusiastically complex, initially and very different sort of RPG for the DS from Square Enix forced players to actively work with both screens while in combat. The end result for a first time player is often the same. You start by wanting to dropkick your DS into the heart of the sun, but you eventually get into the rhythm of The World Ends With You's unique challenges and learn to thrive in this varied environment. The World Ends With You didn't stop there. The character designs and contemporary setting create a world no one is going to confuse with a Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest game anytime soon. You're also bound to fall in love with characters who make up The World Ends With You, so be sure to go buy its eventual port in droves so we get a sequel. Oh, you guys. You had one job, guys. One job. Number 4. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars is kind of amazing for 2 reasons. One, it was still pretty wild in 2009 to see in an action-adventure game about drug deals and other facets of a criminal rampage on a Nintendo console. Chinatown Wars was an impressive effort on Nintendo's part to appeal to a larger range of gamers, long before Devil's Third finally sold 6 gorillion copies on the Wii U a few years later. Did it work? Far more than you might have guessed. As Huang Li, you've been left for dead, and it's up to you to get some nasty revenge and regain a crucial and priceless family heirloom. There's a lot of other stuff to do as well, but sadly no balling with Roman. Chinatown Wars looks fantastic for what it is, plays extremely well with the particulars of the DS, and is jam-packed with missions and side quests. It was a big winner on the DS in 2009, and it's still pretty dang good now. Time for some ports? We think so. Number 3. Mario Kart DS. The 3rd best-selling Nintendo DS game of all time, Mario Kart DS was a hit in every sense of the word. The fact that it came with online play was just the beginning, although the online play aspect notoriously struggled at times. Probably because everyone's older brother was either playing RuneScape or World of Warcraft in the next room. The game nonetheless brought to the DS everything players wanted in a 5th entry in a decade-old mascot racer franchise. Then it added 16 new tracks, 16 classic tracks, new items, and even a compulsory new battle mode. Mario Kart DS didn't skimp on a thing, offering the same fundamentally fun experience with just the right amount of improvements. Some of the most beloved Mario Kart tracks ever can be found here for the first time, with a very solid selection of classic tracks from previous games included too. Controlling the game is a breeze, and even the graphics and character models still look surprisingly good after so many years. Number 2. Pokemon HeartGold and Soulsilver. For some fans, Pokemon HeartGold and Soulsilver still represents the greatest heights the franchise has ever achieved. We're bringing both games together for the number 2 spot because, as is tradition, they are two halves of the whole that represents the next step forward for the series, even if it's technically a little step back. Pokemon HeartGold and Soulsilver were remakes of earlier beloved titles, but this is a lot like Chrono Trigger in the sense that simply labelling them as a remake isn't quite accurate. Both games are loaded to the brim with new features which expand on the beloved gameplay and core components of collecting and training your Pokemon. For instance, now the creepy old dude calls a child who brought them Pokemon to breed when their eggs are ready. Yeah, try not to dwell on that one for too long, eh? There were a lot of incredible Pokemon games on the Nintendo DS, and we are completely cool if you want to swap in your favourites instead, but for us, these two are the best of the best. But they weren't quite as good as number 1, Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story. The Mario franchise was well over 20 years old by the time Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story was released for the Nintendo DS in 2009. Handing the reins for development over to Alpha Dream, Nintendo proved with the release of this bizarre, hilarious and quite challenging RPG hybrid that their iconic mascots could still anchor a must-play title. From an offbeat premise that takes the relationship pitting Mario and Luigi against Bowser to strange heights, including signing Bowser up to an offshore tax haven, to reflecting that strangeness in the easy to understand but difficult to master gameplay, Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story is the very best example of what the DS achieved and made unique in its time as Nintendo's handheld console of choice. It's a visual treat that challenges Mario fans or just casual players in ways they had never encountered before. No surprise that Bowser's Inside Story would later get a sequel and a terrific remake on the 3DS. You can't spell Inside Story without DS is Yeti Ron. Whatever that means. And that was our list for the best Nintendo DS games of all time. I definitely did that all in one take. I didn't need to cut or anything, I'm just that good. We hope you'll join us next week for what might be the final entry in the Nintendo series, the Nintendo 3DS. But until then, thank you for watching.